The Gilded Age is produced by Universal Television and brought to you by HBO of Warner Media. All characters, plot points, and footage are property of HBO. The Gilded Age is a brand new drama airing exclusively on HBO Max. Join your friends at Free Tours by Foot as we take you through New York City, showing you actual locations from the show, locations in New York City the show is based around, discuss plot points, and go over the actual history of all of the events of the Gilded Age. And remember to book your tour with freetoursbyfoot.com the next time you visit New York City or any one of our other locations. And now, on to Katherine.
Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going to be talking about the Gilded Age, episode 7. We are back in podcast style format today, mostly due to some really inclement weather in New York this week, but we wanted to make sure we got this one out. And we'll be able to show some photos of a couple of the locations that we're going to be talking about. But let's go ahead and dive right in. I have Lori back with me this week. And we had some exciting stuff going on in this episode, and you can definitely tell we're getting towards the end of season 1 because we're starting to really see all of the storylines really ramping up and kind of reaching these critical points. But let's jump in first with what I would call the main event of this latest episode, which was electricity. So that's the big event in this episode that all these characters are talking about and going to see is the electric lights being turned on in Lower Manhattan. And much like a lot of the Gilded Age, this is absolutely based on real historic events, though the actual historic event did differ a little bit from what we saw in the Gilded Age. So what we saw in the Gilded Age was these characters going downtown to see the electricity coming on in the New York Times building on Park Row. So first things first, yes, there was a New York Times building, and yes, it was on Park Row. So actually, Park Row was called Newspaper Row. That was kind of the nickname of it, was Newspaper Row. It wasn't just the New York Times down there. There were multiple newspapers headquartered down there. Largely, I believe, Lori, because it was right across from City Hall. It was proximity, really, to stories.
Yes, and that industry moves north like every other industry over time.
Sure.
In New York.
So there is an existing New York Times building, or former New York Times building on Park Row, that if you visit New York City, you would see. You would see it if you took our Brooklyn Bridge, Brooklyn Heights Dumbo tour. I believe you would see it as well on the Lower Manhattan tour. So it's right there, right by City Hall. If you do go and see that, it will not be the one you saw in the show. The one you saw in the show was a previous building. The one that exists today was not finished until 1889, so about 7 years after the events of this episode. So it will look a little bit different, but it is there. And of course, is not the home of the New York Times anymore. I believe the New York Times building is inhabited by Pace University now.
Right. Yeah.
The New York Times, of course, famously in 1904 moved up to 42nd Street, which is why that area is called Times Square. But before all that, it was down in Lower Manhattan. I was there on Newspaper Row or Park Row, and it really was a part of the first electric lights demonstration in Lower Manhattan in 1882. But it all went down a little bit differently than what you saw. So, so let's jump in. So first things first, it was not just the New York Times building that was being lit in that first demonstration. I believe that was really just one of several buildings that were being lit at exactly the same time.
Right. And it was buildings that paid for the service. So not necessarily every building would have had it, but it was, I think, a half a square mile.
Yeah, it was a good stretch. I think actually a little closer to a mile, a square mile. But yeah, but to your point, not every building in that proximity, the people who had gotten service. And actually, the electric station, the power station, was on Pearl Street, which is a little ways away from Park Row. So that's where the actual station was. And so for the demonstration in 1882, that's where Thomas Edison was. He was not in front of the New York Times building. I think for dramatic effect, it was nice to have everybody all in one spot. But the reality is that's not what it would have looked like. People would have been spread out because there were multiple buildings to see. And I would argue the real show, if you wanted to see Thomas Edison flipping the switch, was Pearl Street.
Right.
I don't know if there were people gathered down there, or if people were more in front of the Times building, but it wasn't just the one building.
And the lighting started much earlier.
Yes, much earlier.
It was at 3 p.m. So not
I always find weird.
Not as dramatic is what I meant to say.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously that just wouldn't look nearly so striking on camera. And there was, I thought actually the way they did it was, even though, yes, they took some license historically, I thought what they did capture really well was just the look of utter amazement on people's faces and the excitement that people, I mean, Bertha Russell can barely stay in her seat. She's so excited because this is a woman who sees everything as forward progress. I mean, that's her character. And so to her, I mean, she even has this conversation with Ward McAllister. He's like, is this the right direction? And she basically is like, well, who cares? It's next.
We don't have a choice in the matter, Mr. McAllister. We must go where history takes us.
Right.
Right or wrong, we move forward. And so I think that's an important thing to know if you're watching the show and kind of seeing that scene. That would have been really accurate. I mean, electricity was incredible to people. And this display of the lights going on in Lower Manhattan was not a one-off event. That similar things would happen over the next couple of decades, really. Because for people all over the United States, seeing buildings kind of magically light up, it was amazing. This was often a feature at World's Fairs. The first time they would light up a World's Fair, that was a really big event. Even the first time they lit up the Woolworth Tower in Lower Manhattan, actually not far from Park Row, just across the street. And that wasn't until 1913. And the lighting up of the Woolworth Tower was still such a big deal that the President of the United States wanted to be the one to do it.
Right.
So, I mean, this was not a flash in the pan type of a thing. This was something that would stay really amazing to people and really exciting to people for years. So definitely not a one-off. While I haven't gone and looked and found any historic articles from Peggy's newspaper that she works for covering the event, I would imagine every newspaper probably had reporters there. Right. But what Peggy has been doing is interviewing people in the crowd to kind of get their take on what did they think of this. And I did want to mention a historic figure because they very briefly mention him, and that's Lewis Latimer. So she mentions to her boss, Mr. Fortune, that there's this man who made a massive improvement to Edison's light bulb, and she's wondering if he's going to get credit.
Who else was involved?
Namely, Lewis Latimer, a colored inventor. He created a better carbon filament. That's the thing in the bulb that helps keep the lights on, so to speak.
Well, I'm sure that Mr. Edison will give Mr. Latimer his due credit at the ceremony.
Of course, at the event, no. Spoiler alert. But this is another thing that's based on history. Lewis Latimer was a real person, a real inventor. And actually, not only did he help with the light bulb, he is also credited with inventing one of the first air conditioners.
Oh, wow.
So thank you from those of us that live in places that get hot in the summer. Thank you, Mr. Latimer. And his is a name that's actually come up a little bit in more recent history. It's become common in newer histories that come out about this era, about kind of the dawning of the electric age. It's become popular to pull apart, I'm going to call it the myth of Thomas Edison a little bit more. Because in that time period, I mean, certainly when this episode of the Gilded Age was supposed to take place, he was seen as this almost mythologically gifted inventor. Right. I mean, his nickname was the Wizard of Menlo Park. Right. Menlo Park is, for those that don't know, is in New Jersey. That is where his workshop was. And the reality was the Wizard of Menlo Park was not a solo act by any stretch. He had a giant team of people that worked. And the reason they made as many advances as they did is they had a huge team of people attacking the same problem. And they were all trying things 1,000 different ways until they found something that worked.
Right.
You know, if you try things enough times, enough different ways, you will find a solution. I certainly think Thomas Edison, though, didn't discourage the mentality that some people had that it was him. He was kind of the key here.
Right.
And so it's you'll hear people say in more recent years, oh, you know, Lewis Latimer was really the person that invented the light bulb. And that's not really true either. Actually, neither of them invented the light bulb. So the light bulb was something that happened because a lot of different people were coming up with various iterations of it. The Edison workshop were the ones that made it something that worked on a broad commercial scale. Right. And Lewis Latimer's contribution was not the light bulb itself. It was actually the filament inside the light bulb. So, I mean, the thing that glows, the thing that makes it have light, arguably, I'm gonna say the most important part. So they had already figured out a kind of filament that worked. The problem was it didn't last very long. It burnt out after like 15 hours or something. So the problem with that was it made light bulbs way too expensive. They weren't commercially viable if they only lasted for 15 hours. Lewis Latimer invented a new kind of filament that lasted way longer. So that made light bulbs something you could actually sell to the masses, and it made them cheaper, because, you know, you were going to be able to sell these more widely. So he was certainly really, really crucial in the light bulb becoming something that was available to a lot more people. And I guess we'll see what they do with it in the Gilded Age. We'll see if they have Thomas Edison be like, Lewis Latimer came up with this carbon filament. Probably not, though. Right. But I'm thinking Peggy might write a story about it. Maybe that's like Peggy's next move, is she's going to write a profile on this inventor who, you know, is helping make electric light possible. Right. You're a New Jersey person. Have you actually ever been to the Edison workshop in Menlo Park? I know you can go.
I know, not to the workshop itself. I know they have cherry blossoms there, I believe. Mm-hmm. I've been to that years ago.
Okay. I'm just thinking about it as like, it's in Raritan. I
don't think we've ever gone there as a class trip or anything like that. Not with Statue of Liberty right here, right?
Sure. No, I'm just throwing it out there. I think it's not terribly difficult to get to from the city. So if anybody's visiting the city and wants kind of a, I guess, off the beaten path sort of a day trip excursion, that's something you could do. And so, and Thomas Edison certainly stayed a fixture in this era of New York history. I mean, that's one of the things about the Gilded Age is, I mean, it's all about the advent of all these new technologies and all of these things that are kind of causing giant leaps forward for a lot of people.
And it happens at a very fast rate during the Gilded Age.
Yes. Well, and that's where you see, and I think that's where you start to see even more of a disconnect, because I think the way they did it was so interesting and it made it so stark. You have the new money people, the Russells, and they're there. I mean, George Russell is standing next to Thomas Edison. Bertha is there watching the lights being lit. And at the same time, the Van Ryns are sitting literally in the dark in their house.
Yeah.
I wish I was there. To see Park Row illuminated?
But with what sort of people? Ruffians, thieves, and worse.
Mrs. Russell's taking a party.
I rest my case.
And they're not there because they're not really part of it. So you kind of see a little bit of, some people resisting the change because they want everything to stay the same. Those are not people who necessarily had a great time in the Gilded Age, because that wasn't the Gilded Age.
Right.
It was just that change, constant.
And we still see that today in our society.
Sure.
Right? A lot of progress tends to scare people, some people, and other people, it gets them excited and they jump on board. And I remember reading articles about conspiracy theories about electricity. Like people were really scared. And it kind of reminded me of like conspiracy theories of 5G, right? Those 5G towers and all those conspiracies. It's like, it sounds like electricity.
Because it was new. I mean, it was this new thing. A lot of people really didn't understand it. And some of it wasn't helped along by the fact that the electricity companies themselves were making some electricity sound scary. Because you have to understand that simultaneously, yes, as Edison certainly became one of the big names in this, he wasn't the only person working on light bulbs, and he wasn't the only person working on getting electricity service across the United States. And so this is when you get into something, if you've ever heard of the Current War or the War of the Currents, this happened right afterwards. And it wasn't about, was electricity good or not? It was about which kind of electricity. Because you had direct current and you had alternating current, basically two different delivery methods. Thomas Edison's company did direct current, but other companies like the Westinghouse company, which ended up being where Nikola Tesla worked for quite a while, they used direct current. There were different reasons why, basically pros and cons of each, but it was in the Edison company's best interest to convince people that alternating current was deadly. It will kill you. And so you had these companies themselves sort of like fueling some of the distrust in some of these services and some of these new technologies. And it was because of commercial gain, but it did scare,
sounds like today.
But it did scare people. And the War of the Currents was something that was very real, and it did end up having kind of a lasting effect to this day as far as how we do things, how certain things are delivered, and why. So yeah, it is. It's a kind of an interesting tie-in to modern day, because I guess we haven't changed that much.
No, we have not changed.
It's and I think the 5G is a really good parallel. So that's a little bit about kind of what was going on for real in New York at this time, and certainly the lighting of all of Lower Manhattan, not just the Times building, was just the beginning, certainly not the end. This is something you're going to see a lot. And they're even hinting at kind of how this is going to spread throughout New York City with Mr. Russell's unveiling of what his station is going to look like, because he has this electric light in it. In case you are curious, the station they are referring to is a fictional station.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Union Central Station.
But this is in the era where this is a little after the Vanderbilts would have built Grand Central Depot, the first big train station. And actually, I was reading that architecturally, the model that you're seeing in the Gilded Age is actually kind of a hybrid of the original Grand Central Depot, but also Union Station in DC. So they are mixing up a little bit. Because of course, this is not a real place that existed in New York, but it is kind of modeled off of what was going on. And a lot of the changes that happened with Grand Central over the years, going from Grand Central Depot to Grand Central Station to Grand Central Terminal, a lot of those changes, besides the architecture, were related to electricity. Was the station going to be electric? And then eventually the trains were running on electricity, and they were going underground. So it was really changing everything for years. So if you were watching this episode and being like, you know, we're pretty blasé about electricity these days. Yeah. We're like, oh, hey, I flip a switch, it comes on.
And for those really who are not sure, a Grand Central Terminal is the one that's in New York City today.
Yes. That is the one that's in New York City today. But that you can see it in one of our earlier videos from this series, but that is the third station to be on that spot. All built by the Vanderbilts, starting with Cornelius Vanderbilt, but the first one was Grand Central Depot. So yeah, there was a lot of change going on in New York at the time. And we'll see if they maybe come back to this event. Like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if we at least see Peggy writing a story on it, maybe doing a profile of Lewis Latimer. But I think the other really big thing plotline wise that happened in the episode was Turner getting fired.
Turner, I've been thinking, and I wonder if it isn't time for us to take a rest from each other. What?
I'm gonna be honest, I actually thought that was kind of an abrupt plot shift. I guess I wasn't surprised that Agnes made a big deal out of thinking her son was, you know, having an affair with a servant.
What's happened?
Oscar has disgraced himself.
With Mrs. Russell's maid.
How democratic.
It is no laughing matter.
I was surprised Mrs. Russell went for it, though. I guess that kind of surprised me.
Well, if you have that in the back of your mind that this woman is probably having an affair with Agnes's son, and then you see her talking to your son.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, because I think to me that seemed to be when she changed her mind.
Right.
She was like, well, it's one thing for it to be their son, but it better not be my son.
And the way she was talking to him was so informal.
Right.
Catty as well. So that gives you that not be able to trust her kind of element. She shouldn't be talking to Larry Russell like that. Right.
Right. Well, and certainly for Bertha Russell, who has such high ambitions for her children. I mean, a scandal like that would probably arguably affect her family more than it would the Van Ryns. It would still be a scandal if it got out about the Van Ryns, but their position in society is a lot more secure than the Russells is. So, I mean, you know, something like that, I mean, that would give people plenty of cause to be like, well, we were right about them.
Right.
And that's definitely like the last thing she wants. She's making such fast progress as we're going through the first season. I mean, she's at the event in New York. Ward McAllister's in her carriage. She's like BFFs with Aurora Fane now. I mean, she's really getting somewhere.
Right.
And so we are seeing some interesting stuff happening with the servants, because we have Turner getting fired for essentially a suspicion. I mean, certainly nothing that's confirmed, and she's not actually having an affair with anybody. except for she's trying to with Mr. Russell. You can tell that's why she thinks she got fired.
Right.
And you can tell that George Russell's not sure that that's not why she's getting fired.
Right.
Because when Bertha's like, I've heard she's having an affair with somebody, he's like, who?
So will you fire Turner?
Why? Do you think I should?
It's not for me to say.
So we have that going on in the Russell's house. But then across the street, we've got this like Cold War going on with Bannister. I mean, it's borderline childish. Agnes is like, tell Bannister to tell someone, and like won't touch something that he hands her. It's really dramatic.
Ask him when it was delivered.
When was it delivered, Bannister?
Just now, Mom.
Just now.
And it goes back to what we talked about last week, that the Knickerbockers, which would base more their service on English service and being an employer, being a part of the identity for them. And so there is loyalty to Bannister, even though she's mad at him. She's not fired him.
No,
she's gonna torture him a bit before she forgives him, right? And so we get some little comedy out of it, but yet she's obviously not going to fire him.
No, because she would have already. I mean, if that was going to happen, that would have happened, I think, right away.
And Bertha Russell made that decision the moment she saw Miss Turner talking to her son.
That's true. No, you're right. Very, very different, clearly in the way that these two families view their servants.
Right.
You're right. Like the Van Ryns, it's almost like a family member you're furious at.
Right.
Like you're mad at them, you're not going to talk to them, but you're also not going to cut them out.
Right.
You're just going to be mad at them.
And in the conversation between Agnes and Ada about Mr. Rakes, I was surprised a little bit when she was the second time we've seen Agnes leave the house, when she was getting fitted for her dress.
Yes. She really doesn't leave the house much.
No, but she was saying basically she might not necessarily fight the two of them getting married. She just wants them to think that.
She wants them to think that that's happening. Well, and I think to her, though, that's like the final test.
If they did marry, you wouldn't really cut them, would you?
Don't you want me to?
For Mr. Rakes, because I think, and I'm curious if you picked up on this as well, because I think a lot of the women in Marion's circle are really starting to distrust this guy's intentions. So the way I heard it when Agnes said that, yes, I think she's going to have a great time doing that because that's just her personality. But I think some of it to her is if they think, she's getting cut out, she's disowned, and he still wants to marry her,
right?
Then maybe he's not such a bad dude. Maybe she really did misjudge him. And so to me, it almost seems like, yes, it's catty and it's kind of Mean Girls, but I think she's also thinking this is like how she's going to put him to the ultimate test.
Right.
And see and kind of hope that he reveals his true colors. Because I saw two other people in this episode. So Marion and Mr. Rakes go over to Mrs. Chamberlain's house.
Right.
And she's letting them do their thing. She's letting them have their time. She makes this kind of pointed comment like, hey, make sure if you do this, you're really, really in love, because it's kind of hard sometimes. And, and she's saying for her, it was okay because she really, really was in love. But I can tell, I don't think she thinks that's what she's seeing here. Like, I don't think she's seeing her relationship. And then when they're at the electricity and all of a sudden he's getting all cozy. I mean, Aurora Fane is like side-eyeing him.
Right.
Like, you're getting really chatty with this woman.
I shouldn't, but I will.
That ought to be my motto.
Who is also based on history. So the backstory that they give for this woman, who like she's a niece of this very wealthy man, and everybody assumes no, she's really his illegitimate child. That is real. All of that was real. So I guess we'll see if she sticks around and becomes a character, or if she's just another real historic person they are dropping in for a kind of brief cameo.
Right.
But either way, I think we're clearly moving towards Mr. Rakes is going to be forced to kind of show his hand by these women at some point.
And him knowing all the gossip kind of unnerved me a little bit.
Yeah, listen, anybody who has watched these videos with us, you know we are not hashtag team Mr. Rakes. You know we think he's bad news. Everybody on our side thinks that he's bad news. So I do, and I think it's interesting because in an era where arguably women didn't have a lot of power, they couldn't vote. They were generally, going to have to do whatever their fathers told them to do. They couldn't have jobs. I think what the Gilded Age has been so good at showing is like, yes, all of that was true. But in society and in the way personal relationships happened in society, the women really were the drivers.
Right.
And you're going to see, I think, these women force this guy into showing his hand.
Right.
And I don't think he's going to be expecting that. I think he thinks he's going to be able to sail on through and take what he wants and do whatever he wants. And I just think he is going to meet some really formidable opponents in some of these women. And I'll be curious to see what ends up happening, but I don't know.
I'll be curious if he's in season 2. I think it'll be resolved by the end of the season, maybe.
Yeah. So either he is, because he's actually surprised not a bad guy and maybe Marion's going to actually marry him, or he's going to get run out of town. If anybody can run this guy out of town, I feel like Agnes Van Ryn can. So.
She's so much fun to watch.
Oh, she's a blast. Honestly, in my dreams, if somebody's gonna like go on the attack against Mr. Rakes, I want it to be Agnes Van Ryn, but I also want them to bring Mrs. Fish in for it somehow. Because she'll say something scathing and weird, and it'll be fun. That's just my personal dream. I don't think that there's any reason in the world that that's going to happen plotline wise. Right. But I do think, we only have two episodes left in this season. And so, Lori and I were talking earlier, we think basically all of the plot lines have been introduced at this point. I think what we're going to see over the next 2 episodes is them starting to tie up some of these storylines. Not that they're going to do all of them, because, they might leave something to carry over into season 2. I'm wondering if we'll see Gladys's coming out ball this season.
Right.
I mean, that seems really quick for it to just be 2 more episodes. And I think they have finally revealed now why Mrs. Russell changed her mind. And I think it was smart the way they did this, because it took me a second. I was like, oh, she agreed to this as soon as Carrie Astor mentioned the quadrille and that these other people would be in it. And you saw her in this episode because she has figured out if these other people come, their parents have to come too.
What's changed, Mother?
Why are you talking as if I meant you to be the first debutante in the city who never made her debut?
Of course.
The men and girls who will join in your quadrille, should I ask their parents if they mind?
Oh, no, they'll all love Gladys and they're dying to see inside this house. Everyone is.
Right.
So if Carrie Astor is going to be in a quadrille with Gladys, Caroline Astor has to come to this party.
Right. And you saw on Gladys's face, she realized that as well.
Yeah, because all this whole time she's been saying, I don't want you to come out yet because I can't guarantee that the right people will be at your ball. well, she figured out a way to guarantee that the right people are going to be there. And it's that Carrie Astor, I think, very innocently brought up this idea of, oh, a quadrille because it's fun. And I did one.
Right.
And that was her hook. So,
but I feel like a good finale would be a ball.
It would be. That would be a great
series.
Finale. That would be a really fun finale. Maybe we'll see that in the last episode, see Gladys's coming out ball. I do think that would be really fun. And then that would leave a lot of story options for season 2, because if she's just out, then we don't know what the resolution is going to be, of course, of like, who's she going to end up marrying? Is she going to get forced into one of these dollar princess weddings? So I think we might see Gladys's coming out ball. Certainly, I think we'll figure out what's to become of Mr. Rakes. And it sounds like we're finally, in this next episode, going to get some answers on Peggy's secret.
Right.
Because that has been just one of the most no hints, nothing to go off of. I mean, we've been able to make some conjectures about other things just based on knowledge of history, but that is just not one. So
right, in the coming attractions, Agnes seems pretty upset about her secret.
What is it?
So maybe she's not married. That was my guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know
that. Yeah, you would guess that she was secretly married. I don't think that would upset Agnes that much.
Right.
Really. I think it's going to be something else, and I just don't know what it's going to be. So we're going to find that out, I think, next episode. I think certainly we're going to continue to see how this train crash resolves. I don't know that we'll see the full resolution, but I'm guessing we'll at least find out, are there going to be criminal charges against Mr. Russell? And, we'll just keep seeing what becomes of this. We'll see. I'm curious if Turner is going to still be in the show.
I was wondering that as well.
She's kind of a fun character, and I do wonder, like, do we continue to see her? I'm wondering what they'll maybe try to do with some of these servant storylines as we get towards the end of season 1. What becomes of Church? Does he stick around maybe as Mrs. Russell's going in a new direction with the household? I think Bannister stays and just like suffers through Agnes's wrath.
But he's also going to get revenge on Church because Turner
1000%. Absolutely going to get revenge on Church. He's going to suffer Agnes's wrath for a decade, probably, and just deal with it. And I'm hoping we see Marion make some kind of move forward into the next part of her life. Maybe it is going to be realizing Mr. Rakes is no good and forging a new path ahead for herself, or maybe Mr. Rakes is going to surprise us all and be this nice guy, and she's going to be like, I don't care, I'm going to marry him. I don't see it. Clearly none of us are impressed by Mr. Rakes. He's definitely seems like a cad to all of us. But we'll see. And I'm hoping, and maybe as they resolve Peggy's secret, we'll get to the bottom of what is this real conflict between she and her father, because I know Altavise and I were talking, it seems way too much that it's just, I didn't want to take over the family business. It's way more dramatic than that, whatever it is. So I'm guessing it has way more to do with whatever this secret is that she has. But we'll find out next time. We're looking forward to an exciting next 2 episodes, concluding season 1. And we'll be back after we get episode 8 out next week, talking about what's going on. So we will see you next time.